All right. So have you ever wondered what Mark Zuckerberg is really thinking about, like what his vision for the future is?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people have.
Well, we're going to try to get into his head a little bit today and kind of understand his vision by diving deep into a conversation he recently had with Joe Rogan.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's a great one. And this isn't just going to be about like the tech specs of Oculus or the Metaverse.
Real.
We're talking about like the philosophy behind all of it, the driving force behind it all, and what it could actually mean, like for you and me, for how we connect with people, for how we work, and even how we experience reality itself.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the idea of presence is so interesting, the way he talks about it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he's really focused on this idea that the future of connection isn't just about, like, transmitting information. Like, here's an email, here's a text message.
Right.
It's really about, actually feeling like you're with somebody, even if you're miles apart.
Okay, so I'm picturing those really awkward early video calls where there's, like, a lag and it like feels like you're talking to a robot. How do we get from there to that presence thing?
Well, he was describing one of his experiences testing out the new Oculus, and he was like blown away by how realistically his avatar was mirroring his facial expressions. Like even like tiny little jaw movements that he was making were replicated in the avatar.
Wow.
So it really gave him this sense of realism that goes way beyond just like a typical video call.
So it's not just seeing the person, but it's like those subtle like cues that make us feel like we're actually in the same room with someone.
Exactly.
So is this the future? Like, are we all going to be wearing like these clunky VR headsets in the future?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, he actually laid out two kind of parallel paths that they're looking at. One is pushing the boundaries of the VR headsets and kind of incorporating elements of augmented reality, AR, like being able to, experience your physical surroundings, but within the virtual space. Like imagine, being able to rearrange your furniture in VR before you actually move anything.
Oh, that's actually very useful. I need that.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at like visualizing that kind of thing.
So there's a lot of kind of real world applications there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what's the other path?
So the second path is focusing on AR glasses.
Okay.
So, they're starting with kind of more basic functionality now, things like the Ray-Ban stories and stuff.
Right.
But the ultimate goal is to have glasses that can seamlessly, blend holograms with your real world view.
Right.
So imagine, walking down the street and you can see virtual directions overlaid on the sidewalk in front of you, or you could have a virtual meeting with your colleagues and they would just appear as if they were, sitting across from you.
That sounds like straight out of a science fiction film. Like how far away are we from that though?
Yeah. It always seems like, these glasses are like 5 years away every time you read a tech prediction.
Exactly.
But Zuckerberg seems pretty confident that, we're going to see AR glasses with like full functionality within, 3 to 5 years.
Wow. Okay.
One of the big challenges they're working on is the display technology.
Yeah.
They're using something called waveguides. Have you heard of this?
No.
So it's basically like a transparent material that can project light at different depths.
Oh.
Which then creates the illusion of depth in the holograms that you're seeing.
Okay, that's getting a bit technical for me.
Yeah.
But I can see how that would, make things feel more real if you're looking at it.
Right.
Okay, so we've got the headsets, we've got the glasses, but what about like how we're going to control all this stuff?
Right.
Like I'm imagining a lot of like frantic hand waving and yelling at like unresponsive virtual objects.
Yeah.
Is it going to be like that?
Yeah. I mean, voice commands and hand gestures will definitely play a role.
Okay.
But he actually thinks that those won't always be like practical or discreet enough.
Oh, okay.
So his solution, which I thought was fascinating, is to tap into our body's own like electrical signals.
Wait, what? Hold on. Are we getting like all matrixy here?
It is a little bit matrixy. So he's talking about like a wristband that could pick up signals from like really subtle hand movements.
Okay.
Like, movements that are so small you might not even realize you're making them.
Wow.
And then those signals could be translated into commands for the glasses.
Oh, so instead of like, swiping on my phone, I could just like twitch my wrist and it would like scroll through a document.
Exactly.
What could possibly go wrong?
Well, there are definitely concerns about, distraction and information overload.
Of course. Yeah.
He actually acknowledged that, good AI-powered, like, do not disturb modes are going to be essential.
Oh.
So, we're not constantly bombarded by notifications and virtual pop-ups and stuff.
Right, because I'm already having trouble like disconnecting as it is. So, I can just imagine it getting worse. So, okay, so we're controlling virtual worlds with our minds now.
Right.
But how much control do we actually have? Like, what about these algorithms that like decide what we see and how we experience these platforms?
Yeah, that's a huge question.
Yeah.
And one that he, addressed head on in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
He argued that purely chronological feeds, like the old days of social media,
Right.
are actually too easily manipulated because, you could have spammers just flooding the top of your feed.
Right.
And you might miss important updates from, friends and family.
So he's saying like some level of ranking is necessary, even if it means like sacrificing that pure unfiltered view.
Exactly, yeah.
But how do these algorithms actually like work though? I mean, are they reading our minds too?
Not quite reading our minds, but they're incredibly sophisticated. I mean, even just like basic engagement signals, like the likes and the comments and the shares.
Right.
They're telling the algorithm what kind of content we're most likely to engage with, even if it doesn't necessarily understand the content itself.
So the more I click on cat videos, the more cat videos I see.
Exactly.
Well, I can live with that.
Yeah, me too.
But, I keep hearing all this stuff about algorithms, like amplifying outrage and division.
Right.
Like, where does that fit into this picture?
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Yeah.
He actually talked about a deliberate choice that they made at Facebook to kind of downplay the anger reactions.
Oh, interesting.
So even though those posts might generate a lot of clicks and comments, they decided it was more important to kind of create a more positive overall experience.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty significant decision to make.
It really is. And it really kind of highlights the power and the responsibility that comes with shaping the digital landscape.
Absolutely.
But there's another side to this whole content moderation puzzle that we need to unpack.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2?
Yeah, definitely.
This is already giving me a lot to think about.
Me too. Welcome back. Let's dive into like the trickier side of all of this content moderation.
Okay.
Yeah. It's one thing to like tweak an algorithm.
Right.
But it's a whole other challenge to deal with like the just massive amount of content on a platform like Facebook.
You're telling me billions of users, countless posts, videos, comments,
Right.
like how do they even begin to like wrap their heads around all of that?
Yeah.
It feels like trying to like hold back a tsunami with a sieve.
It's a monumental task for sure. And Zuckerberg admitted that, there's no easy answers.
Yeah.
But he did emphasize a few like key principles
Okay.
that they're trying to follow. The first one being transparency.
Okay.
So like being open about their policies and how they're applied.
Okay. Transparency makes sense, but like who gets to decide, what is acceptable and what crosses the line? Does Facebook become like the judge and jury of the internet?
Right. Well, that's where the second principle comes in.
Okay.
Avoiding centralized control.
Okay.
So he talked about the importance of working with like independent fact checkers
Right.
to combat misinformation.
Yeah.
And also like establishing an oversight board
Okay.
to like provide checks and balances on Facebook's own power.
So it's not just like one person or even one company making these decisions,
Oh,
but
yeah.
like what about, those like really controversial stories that everyone's talking about? Like how do they handle those?
Yeah, well, he specifically addressed the Hunter Biden laptop story,
Oh, okay.
which Facebook initially chose to like limit the spread of
Uh-huh.
until they could like verify its authenticity,
Okay.
which of course sparked accusations of censorship from some quarters.
Right. Yeah. And it raises those like really tricky questions about, freedom of speech versus like preventing the spread of potentially harmful or false information. Like where do you even draw the line?
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And he argued that, they were erring on the side of caution,
Yeah.
especially given like the potential for foreign interference in elections.
Right.
And he emphasized that like their goal isn't to be the ultimate arbiter of truth,
Right.
but to like give users the context they need
Yeah.
to make informed decisions for themselves.
It sounds like they're trying to walk this like really tightrope between protecting users and like respecting their autonomy.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
But what about this like shadow banning thing
Oh,
you're hearing
yeah.
about? Is it real or is that just like a conspiracy theory?
He denied that Facebook has any like official shadow banning policies,
Mm-hmm.
where users are like deliberately silenced without their knowledge.
Okay.
But he did acknowledge that certain actions, like repeatedly posting content that's been flagged as false,
Right.
could lead to like reduced visibility.
So it's not like outright banning, but
Yeah.
it's like a subtle demotion.
Right, exactly.
Like your posts might still be there,
Yeah,
but they're just less likely to be seen by others.
exactly.
That seems kind of sneaky, don't you think?
It definitely raises concerns about transparency and fairness,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
It's easy to see how that could fuel mistrust and suspicion,
Yeah.
especially if users don't understand why their content is being like deprioritized.
Right. It feels like a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
So how do they decide, like, what kind of content deserves this kind of treatment?
Well, he stressed that like their primary goal is to create a space where people can like express themselves
Right.
and connect with others,
Mhm.
not to like impose their own worldview.
Okay.
He kind of drew a distinction between helping people discover content they're interested in
Yeah.
and setting policies about like what's permissible.
Okay, so they're trying to avoid playing favorites.
Right.
But they still need, like, some guardrails to prevent the platform from descending into total chaos.
Yes. And
So how do they balance those two things?
it's a constant evolution. And he talked about the importance of like building diverse communities
Yeah.
and exposing people to like a wider range of perspectives.
Okay.
He even mentioned the backfire effect,
Oh,
where sometimes showing people opposing viewpoints can actually like entrench their existing beliefs even further.
Wow. That's fascinating and kind of depressing.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, like, just throwing more information at people isn't always the solution.
Right.
So what's the alternative?
It's complex, but he seemed to suggest that like over time, as people become more accustomed to encountering different perspectives online,
Yeah.
we might actually see like a decrease in polarization
Oh.
and a more like reasoned, productive form of online discourse.
Well, I hope he's right. This whole content moderation thing sounds like a never-ending headache.
It really does.
Makes me wonder if Zuckerberg ever, like, regrets creating Facebook in the first place.
Yeah, he actually addressed that,
Oh, really?
saying that as Facebook has grown, his focus has shifted
Okay.
from simply connecting people to tackling these like larger, more complex issues.
Yeah.
The kind that require like long-term thinking and a willingness to take risks.
So it's less about, like, the day-to-day drama and
Yeah.
more about the big picture, the long game.
Exactly.
But, like, what does that actually look like?
Well, he specifically mentioned the metaverse as one of those like decade-long projects
Oh.
he's pouring energy into.
Yeah.
He believes that this like immersive, interactive world
Mm-hmm.
has the potential to revolutionize everything from communication and entertainment to work and education.
That's a pretty bold vision, it sounds like. He's not just building a company, he's trying to, like, build a new world.
Yeah, it's very ambitious.
Yeah. I have to admit, I'm still a little skeptical. Like, it all sounds very futuristic and maybe a bit hyped.
I hear you. It's easy to get caught up in the hype cycle,
Right.
but I do think there's a lot of substance behind his vision. And this brings us to like a crucial question.
Okay.
How does this vision of the future align with his own personal values and motivations?
That's a great point. We've talked about, like, the challenges, the philosophy.
Right.
But, like, who is Mark Zuckerberg, the man behind the curtain?
Exactly. And that's what we'll uncover in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, buckle up. Okay, so we've spent, like, the last two parts getting into, like, the nuts and bolts of, like, what he's trying to build and all the challenges and stuff.
Right.
But I'm curious about, like, the man behind the mission, you know?
Yeah.
Like, what makes Mark Zuckerberg tick? What drives him?
Well, one thing that really struck me throughout the conversation was like his genuine belief in the power of connection. You know, he spent almost 2 decades building social software, like constantly pushing the boundaries of how we interact online.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that, like, Facebook started with, like, just simple text updates.
Yeah.
And then it was photos, and then it was videos, and now we're talking about this whole, like, immersive metaverse experience.
Yeah.
It's a pretty remarkable evolution.
Yeah, I think it speaks to like his relentless drive to kind of bridge the gap between the physical and digital worlds. You know, he wants to make us feel truly present with each other, regardless of distance. And what's interesting is how his personal life even reflects this tension between like the physical and digital realms.
Right. Like, when he was talking about his love for jujitsu and how grounding it feels, you know?
Yeah.
Like, he even admitted to, like, encouraging his friends and family to get involved because he values that physical connection so much.
It's almost like he recognizes like the limitations of the digital world he's creating.
Yeah.
And he kind of seeks balance in the physical world.
Yeah, but managing a company like Facebook, like with billions of users,
Right.
and pursuing all these like ambitious goals, like that's got to be incredibly demanding.
I can't even imagine.
he was actually really open about like the overwhelming amount of information he processes daily.
Right.
You know, the constant pressure to like address every crisis and every controversy.
Yeah, he even compared it to being a firefighter, you know,
Oh, wow.
constantly putting out fires, but never really making progress on what truly matters.
I think that feeling of being like pulled in a million directions is something a lot of us can relate to, even on the like smaller scale.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how does someone like Zuckerberg like cope with that level of intensity and responsibility?
Well, he talked about the importance of like prioritizing, you know,
Right.
delegating effectively, building a strong team that he can trust.
Yeah.
He also talked about, you know, carving out time for his family and like his personal well-being. You know, it sounds simple, but I can only imagine like how hard it is to maintain that balance when you're leading a company that impacts literally billions of people.
Yeah. It also takes a certain kind of like optimism, I think, to like keep pushing forward amidst all the like criticism and scrutiny that Facebook faces.
Yeah.
Like, what did he have to say about that?
Well, despite all the challenges, you know, he seemed genuinely optimistic about the potential for technology to be a force for good.
Okay.
You know, he believes that the metaverse can create like new opportunities for connection, for education, for economic empowerment.
But he wasn't naive about the downsides either, right?
No.
I mean, we've been talking about like misinformation, algorithmic bias, privacy concerns, like, all of those ethical dilemmas that come with like shaping the digital landscape.
Yeah, he acknowledged those concerns head on. You know?
Yeah.
And he emphasized the need to like proceed thoughtfully and address those challenges. His overall message, I think, was one of like cautious optimism. You know, a belief that we can kind of navigate these complexities and create a better future with the help of technology.
It's a future that's like unfolding right before our eyes. And whether you're excited or apprehensive,
Right.
I mean, Mark Zuckerberg is undoubtedly a driving force in shaping that future. I mean, we've explored like his vision, his motivations, his struggles, his hopes.
Yeah.
And it's clear he's not just building a company, he's trying to build a new world.
It's a journey that's definitely worth paying attention to.
Yeah.
And hopefully this deep dive has given you a new perspective on, you know, the man, the mission, and the future he's building. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for listening, everybody.